And for a closer look at the impact of those trade talks, I spoke with economist Kirkegaard of the Peterson Institute for International Economics. I asked him how trade relations with China and Russia are changing in light of the fallout from Western sanctions.
Even though these intergovernmental agreements have been signed and swap deals, etc., what we haven't seen yet is significant commitments of Chinese money to projects in Russia. And until we see that, personally, I'm not sure this really means that much.
You mentioned intergovernmental agreements, the ones that have just been signed between Russia and China that will allow Russia to sell $400 billion of natural gas to China. Russia still wants another natural gas deal. What are the prospects of that?
I think the prospects of that, such an additional deal being signed, is quite slim at this moment, at least. Because basically, China is being asked to provide all the financing for these deals, and they're very long-term. There's a lot of long-term political risk, in my opinion, for such a deal. To be quite frank, I think if you're the Chinese leadership, you're looking at the Russian government right now, who knows who they'll be dealing with in 10 years' time, which is, and this is the deal that's even longer than that.
Okay.
So I think the prospects are actually quite slim. And I think we should also be careful when $25 billion swap lines sounds like a lot. But the reality is that there's a very different deal between having such a deal and actually activating it. Because you will see that there are these swap lines with many different countries, but very few of them were actually activated during the height of the global financial crisis in East Asia. So there's always a lot of political risk involved here. And I think, even if the sanctions are perhaps pushing China and Russia together, there's still a lot of mutual mistrust between the two governments. And it'll take quite some time, in my opinion, to overcome that.
Well, that said, we are seeing this $25 billion swap deal that you mentioned. And I wonder, just on the face of it, the way it's being advertised in the Russian press is that it's a way to increase trade between these two countries, increase it up to $100 billion in just the next year. Even if they don't access it immediately, does it pave the way to increase trade relations between these two countries?
I think that you will see, partly because of the sanctions, but also partly simply because of the natural size of the two economies. These are two economies that should trade much more with each other than they do today. Whether there were sanctions or not. So in that sense, this is a good and natural development.
But long term, or even in the short term, you've got these sanctions. Russia doesn't have a lot of trading partners that are as willing to trade as China. There are other countries too, but not with the size of the economy that China has, certainly. What is the significance of just that increased trade, the increased natural gas deals, various kinds of manufactured goods, whatever it is, because Russia does need that, and its economy is not doing well as a result of these sanctions?
No, I mean, I think that the reality is that Russia needs this deal much more than China does. So there's no doubt that China can and should negotiate, drive a hard bargain. And if you look at the details, there are not many details, but those hearings that we hear about what is the price agreed on the long-term gas deal, it's actually quite advantageous to China because Russia is in a tight position. But I think still, though, on many of these issues, Russia is predominantly a raw material exporter and China is an importer. And that means that in many of these basic business discussions, Russia and China will be on opposite sides of the table. And therefore,
so it's a natural fit.
Within natural resources and commodities more broadly, which really is the vast majority of Russia's exports. And therefore, again, while I welcome increased trade between two large neighboring countries, I think to say that this is the sort of nucleus of a long, strategic, big alliance, I think we're nowhere near that yet.
And that was economist Kirkegaard of the Peterson Institute for International Economics.